After saving a kitten from a grim fate, I learned she wasn't what she seemed. Now I'm battling to hold on to her as officials close in to take her away. I'll never forget the day I found Luna. The sun was high and hot that afternoon, pressing down on me like a heavy hand as I shuffled across the parking lot, my arms wrapped tight around crinkling grocery bags. That's when I saw her, a tiny, trembling shadow tucked inside a battered crate on the back of a rusty pickup truck. She was so small, her fur a wild mess of gray and brown, sticking out in clumps like she'd been caught in a storm. But it was her eyes that stopped me cold, big golden pools that shimmered with something raw and broken, staring right into me. They weren't just pretty, they were alive, pleading, pulling me in like a hook I couldn't shake. I stood there, frozen, groceries sagging in my arms, knowing I couldn't just walk away. The truck's driver noticed me hovering. He climbed out, boots crunching on the gravel, his face weathered and tired, like he'd seen too many long days. His name was Mike. I caught it later when he mumbled it. And he had this rough kindness about him, the kind that doesn't say much but means everything. "You eyeing that little troublemaker?" he asked, jerking his thumb toward the crate. I nodded, still caught in those eyes, and he sighed, running a hand through his dark, messy hair. He told me he'd found her near his farm, a scrappy little thing darting through the fields, chasing his chickens and leaving feathers scattered like confetti. "She's been a pain," he admitted, his voice low and gruff, but I couldn't just let her starve out there. Figured I'd drop her at the vet, see if they could sort her out. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the way Luna's ears twitched at his words, or the way her thin body curled tighter into itself, like she knew her fate was hanging by a thread. My heart started pounding, a drumbeat I couldn't ignore, and before I could think it through, words tumbled out of my mouth. "I'll take her," I said, my voice shaking a little. Mike raised an eyebrow, skepticism creasing his forehead. "You sure? She's a handful, and I don't even know where she came from. Could be wild for all I know." "I'm sure," I shot back, too fast, too eager. I was already digging into my purse, pulling out my wallet with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. "I can give you something for your trouble. Please just let me have her." He stared at me for a long moment like he was trying to figure out if I was crazy or just stubborn. Maybe I was both. We stood there in the parking lot, haggling back and forth, my ice cream melting into a puddle in its carton while I pleaded my case. He kept warning me about how she'd been skulking around his farm for weeks, how he'd only caught her because she'd gotten bold and sloppy. But all I could see was Luna, her head tilting slightly as she watched us, like she understood every word. Finally, Mike gave in. "All right," he muttered, shaking his head as he pocketed the crumpled bills I handed him. "She's yours. Just don't say I didn't warn you." My chest tightened with a mix of thrill and terror as he hauled the crate off the truck bed, setting it down with a thud that rattled my bones. Up close, Luna was even more striking. Her fur was filthy, streaked with dirt, and her ribs poked out under her skin. But there was something fierce in her, something that made my breath catch. She wasn't just a stray. She was a survivor, a mystery I was suddenly responsible for. Mike tipped his cap, muttering a quick good luck before climbing back into his truck. I watched him pull away, dust kicking up behind his tires, leaving me alone with her. My groceries were a warm, soggy mess by then, but I didn't care. I crouched down, peering into the crate, my heart racing so fast I could hear it in my ears. Luna stared back, her golden eyes steady now, less afraid. "Hey girl," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the hum of distant traffic. "What am I getting myself into?" She didn't answer, of course, but something in her gaze told me this was only the beginning, and whatever came next, we were in it together. Getting Luna home was a clumsy mess. I stood in that parking lot, staring at her crate and my soggy grocery bags, wondering how I'd manage it all. My arms were already aching, but I couldn't leave her there. So I wedged the crate under one arm and hauled the bags with the other, stumbling to my car like some kind of awkward juggler. The drive back to my tiny apartment felt endless, my mind buzzing with excitement and a sharp edge of panic. What was I doing? I didn't even own a pet brush, let alone know how to care for whatever Luna was. But every time I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, her little head poking up from the crate, those golden eyes steady and curious, I felt this tug like she was already mine. When we finally got inside, I set the crate down in the middle of my cramped living room, the faded carpet scratching under my sneakers. I knelt beside it, my hands shaky as I unlatched the door. "Come on out, girl," I said softly, keeping my voice low so I wouldn't spook her. Luna didn't rush. She edged out, one cautious paw at a time, her nose twitching like she was mapping every inch of this strange new place. Her fur brushed the floor, leaving faint streaks of dirt, and I could see how thin she was, ribs like shadows under her skin. I stayed still, sitting cross-legged, letting her decide what happened next. She circled the room, sniffing at the couch, the coffee table, my pile of unopened mail, before finally creeping closer to me. I held out my hand, palm up, and waited. My heart thumped loud enough I swore she could hear it. When her wet nose brushed my fingers, I nearly jumped. Then she let me touch her, my hand sliding over her rough, matted fur. And something inside me melted. It was softer than it looked, even tangled and filthy and warm, like she was trusting me with a secret. "You're safe now," I whispered, my voice cracking a little. She didn't pull away, just stood there, letting me stroke her, her eyes half closed. I grinned, feeling this goofy rush of joy. "I think I'll call you Luna," I said, watching her ears flick up at the sound. "What do you think?" She didn't answer, but the way she settled closer felt like a yes. That first night, Luna picked a corner by the window, curling into a tight ball, her eyes glinting in the dark as I moved around, getting ready for bed. I piled up some old blankets for her, set out a bowl of water and some leftover chicken I figured she might eat. She didn't touch it, just watched me, her gaze sharp and unblinking. I didn't push her, I got it. She needed time. Lying in bed later, I could hear her shifting, little rustles that made me smile into the dark. My apartment wasn't much, just a shoebox with peeling paint and a leaky sink, but it felt different with her in it, bigger somehow. I didn't know a thing about animals, had never even kept a goldfish alive, but this felt right, like a piece I hadn't known was missing had clicked into place. The next few weeks were a wild blur. Luna settled in, claiming my space like she'd always belonged. She had this habit of stealing my hats. My favorite knit beanie went missing one morning, only to turn up buried in her blanket nest, covered in fur but still intact. I'd laugh every time, fishing it out while she watched me with this smug little look. Our walks were something else. I'd clip a leash on her, and she'd prance beside me, her steps light and graceful like she owned the sidewalk. People would stare, some smiling, some stepping back. But the second we passed another animal, a yappy dog or a stray cat, all bets were off. Luna would lunge, yowling this high, wild sound that echoed down the street, pulling so hard I'd have to plant my feet to keep from toppling over. I'd tug her back, breathless and laughing, while she'd bounce around like a kid on a sugar high. Then I started noticing it. Luna wasn't just growing, she was exploding. Her paws, once these cute little pads, were now massive, spreading wide when she walked. Her head hit my waist when she stood next to me, and she'd eat anything I put down, plus some. Neighbors started giving me funny looks, their eyebrows shooting up when we passed. At the park, kids who used to run over to pet her hung back, whispering to their moms. I couldn't shake the worry gnawing at me. Something wasn't normal. My hands got clammy just thinking about it. So I called Dr. Emma, the vet down the street, and booked an appointment, my stomach twisting tighter with every day that ticked by. Whatever Luna was, I had a feeling my life was about to turn upside down. Sitting in Dr. Emma's office, I felt like the air had turned thick, pressing against my chest as she ran her hands over Luna's sleek, growing frame. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting sharp shadows on the tiled floor, and Luna's golden eyes flicked between us, calm but alert. I'd been chewing my lip the whole time, watching Dr. Emma's face, her brows knitting tighter with every measurement, every poke and prod. My palms were sweaty, slipping on the plastic chair arms, and I kept telling myself it was nothing, just a checkup. But when she finally straightened up and turned to me, her expression made my stomach drop like a stone. "Sophie," she said, her voice steady but heavy, "Luna's not a dog. She's a bobcat." The word hit me like a slap. A bobcat? My Luna? I couldn't breathe right, my lungs stuttering as I stared at her sprawled on the exam table. Those massive paws, that wild grace I'd always noticed but never named. Dr. Emma kept talking, her words tumbling over me like cold water. She said Luna must have been abandoned near Mike's farm as a kitten, mistaken for some stray house cat until she started growing into what she really was. She's been with humans too long, Dr. Emma explained, her glasses glinting as she adjusted them. She wouldn't survive in the wild now. But Sophie, keeping a bobcat, it's not legal. I have to report this to Wildlife Services. My hand was already buried in Luna's fur, stroking her warm, solid side as she leaned into me, purring like nothing was wrong. A bobcat. My head spun, flashing back to our walks, her tugging at squirrels the way she'd perch on my windowsill like she owned the skyline. It made sense, but it didn't. She wasn't just some animal to me. She was Luna, my shadow, my friend. I can't lose her, I whispered, barely loud enough to hear myself. Dr. Emma's eyes softened, but she didn't budge. I'm sorry, Sophie. It's the law. The drive home was quiet, just the hum of the engine and Luna's soft breaths from the back seat. I kept sneaking glances at her in the mirror, her long legs stretched out, her ears twitching at every sound. She looked different now, wilder, like I was seeing her for the first time. My hands gripped the wheel tight, knuckles white, because I knew what was coming. Wildlife Services wouldn't let me keep her in my little apartment, not like this. That night, I sat on my balcony, the city lights blurring below me as Luna sprawled beside me, her head nudging my knee. I scratched behind her ears, feeling the rumble of her purr, and whispered, I'll fight for you, Luna, I promise. But inside, I was shaking, terrified of the storm I could feel brewing. It hit a few days later. Sarah from Wildlife Services knocked on my door, her tall frame filling the entryway, a clipboard clutched in her hand. She had kind eyes, but a no-nonsense set to her jaw that made my heart race. Luna patted over, curious, while I stood there, arms crossed tight like I could hold everything together. Sarah looked around my tiny place, the scratched-up couch, Luna's blanket nest in the corner, and started scribbling notes. I held my breath, watching her measure the space, her pen scratching louder than it should have. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. Sophie, I can see you love her, but a bobcat in an apartment, it's not safe and it's against regulations. I nodded, my throat burning as tears pricked my eyes. I know, I said, voice wobbling, but I can't just give her up. She's family. Sarah's face softened, just a flicker, and she flipped through her papers. There might be a way, she said, surprising me. You'd need to move somewhere bigger, get a rescue license, build a proper enclosure. It's a lot, but it's possible. My head spun with the list. Fences, permits, space. But then she added, legally, I should take her now. I'm giving you 3 months to figure it out. That's it. 3 months. It sounded like forever and no time at all. After she left, I sank onto the floor, Luna curling up beside me, her warm weight pressing against my side. I buried my face in her fur, breathing in that earthy, wild smell that was all her. We'll make it work, I murmured, more to myself than her. But as her golden eyes met mine, trusting and steady, I felt the weight of it all. The impossible fight ahead, the ticking clock. My cozy little world with Luna was unraveling, and I didn't know if I was strong enough to stitch it back together. All I knew was I had to try, because losing her wasn't an option. Not now, not ever. I threw everything I had into saving Luna. After Sarah's visit, I sold my apartment, the little haven with its worn couch and Luna's hat-strewn corner, without a second thought. My hands shook as I signed away my savings, trading it all for a scrappy 5-acre lot an hour from the city. The day I moved in, I stood on that patchy ground, staring at the sagging trailer that was now home, the wind whistling through the weeds. It wasn't much, just dirt and a rickety roof, but it was a chance. Luna bounded out of the car, her paws kicking up dust, and I felt a spark of hope. "This is ours, girl," I said, scratching her ears as she leaned into me, her golden eyes bright against the gray sky. But deep down, my stomach churned. 3 months wasn't long, and I had no clue where to start. I got to work anyway. Every morning, I'd stumble out of the trailer at sunrise, the air sharp and cold, hauling a hammer and rolls of wire I'd scraped together from hardware store sales. My hands turned raw fast, blisters splitting open as I drove posts into the hard earth, stretching fencing until my shoulders burned. Sweat stung my eyes, but I kept going, talking to Luna through the dust. "This is your spot," I'd say, my voice rough. "No more crates, just freedom." She'd watch me from the grass, her tail flicking, like she believed every word. At night, I'd collapse on the trailer floor, Luna curled beside me, her warmth seeping into my aching bones. But the clock was ticking, and every gap in the fence felt like a countdown I couldn't outrun. When Sarah came to check my progress, my heart was a jackhammer in my chest. She walked the uneven ground, her boots crunching, clipboard in hand, while I trailed behind, wiping sweaty palms on my jeans. The fence wobbled in the breeze, and the shelter I'd rigged, a tarp over some plywood, looked pathetic even to me. She stopped, pointed at a loose post. "This isn't secure," she said, her tone soft but unyielding. "And the shelter needs drainage, better cover. It's not enough, Sophie." I nodded, my throat tight, stammering about how I'd spent everything, every cent, every ounce of energy. She sighed, her eyes flicking to Luna pacing nearby. "I see how much she means to you, but regulations don't bend. You've got 6 weeks to fix this, or we'll take her to a sanctuary." 6 weeks. The words echoed in my head as her truck rumbled away, leaving me alone in the fading light. I sank onto the trailer steps, the sunset painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink, but all I could see was Luna, her sleek shape cutting through the grass, oblivious to the axe hanging over us. Tears spilled hot down my cheeks, and I didn't bother wiping them away. I'd failed her. The money was gone, the land was a mess, and 6 weeks felt like 6 minutes. That night, I started pulling away. When Luna nudged me with her nose or dropped my beanie at my feet, I'd mutter something about chores and turn my back. Her eyes dimmed, confused, and she'd slink off to the edge of the lot, curling up alone. It tore me apart, but I thought it'd hurt less if I let her go now, before they ripped her away. I hit rock bottom a few days later. Sitting in the trailer's dim glow, my phone screen blurry through tears, I typed out our story, every desperate moment, from finding her in that crate to this crumbling fight. My fingers trembled as I posted it online, not expecting anything, just needing to scream into the dark. But then it caught fire. My phone buzzed nonstop, people sharing it, strangers typing, "You've got this, and don't give up." A guy named Jake messaged about spare fencing he could bring. Lily, a vet from town, offered advice on enclosures. Then money trickled in. $5 here, 10 there, from people I'd never met. I stared at the screen, my breath hitching, hope flickering like a weak flame. The next day, Jake's truck rolled up loaded with wire and posts. "Heard you're in a bind," he said, grinning as he unloaded it. By afternoon, more showed up. Folks with hammers, lumber, even coffee for the crew. We worked fast, pounding stakes, stringing wire higher and stronger than before. Someone dug a trench for drainage. Another built a real shelter with sloped sides. Luna watched from the sidelines, her tail flicking faster each day, her eyes bright again. I knelt beside her one evening, my hand sinking into her fur, whispering, "I'm sorry I pulled away. We're in this together now." The crowd around us, strangers turned friends, hammered on, and for the first time I believed we might beat the clock. Luna purred against me, and that tiny flame of hope roared into something fierce. The night before Sarah's final visit, I couldn't sleep. I sat outside the trailer, the air cool and sharp, staring at the new enclosure we'd built. Tall fences gleaming in the moonlight, a sturdy den tucked under a sloping roof, a little creek trickling through the dirt. Luna pressed against me, her warm bulk steadying my jittery nerves as I scratched behind her ears. "We did it, girl," I whispered, my voice shaky with a mix of fear and hope. Her golden eyes glinted up at me, calm and trusting, like she knew we'd come too far to lose now. The land buzzed with quiet. Volunteers had gone home, leaving just us and the stars, but my heart wouldn't stop racing. Everything hung on tomorrow, and I wasn't sure I could handle it if we fell short. Sarah pulled up at dawn, her truck kicking up dust as I stood waiting, hands stuffed in my pockets to hide the trembling. She stepped out, clipboard in hand, and I led her to the enclosure without a word, my throat too tight to speak. She walked the perimeter slow and deliberate, her boots crunching on the gravel we'd laid for drainage. I trailed behind, watching her check every post, every wire, her pen scratching notes I couldn't read. Luna paced inside her temporary pen, her tail flicking like she felt the weight of this too. My stomach twisted with every step Sarah took, past the reinforced fence, the shaded den, the creek we dug by hand. It looked good to me, better than good. But what if it wasn't enough? After what felt like hours, Sarah stopped and turned to me, her face unreadable. My breath caught, and I braced myself for the worst. Then a small smile broke through. "Sophie," she said, her voice warm, "this is amazing." She flipped through her clipboard, checking boxes as she went. "The fence is secure, the shelter's perfect, the enrichment. It's all here. You've met every standard." I blinked, not trusting my ears. She pulled a paper from her stack and handed it over, a wildlife rescue license with my name on it. "Congratulations," she added, her eyes crinkling. "You've earned this." Relief crashed over me like a wave, and I burst into tears right there, clutching the license to my chest. Luna let out a sharp, wild yowl from her pen, her head thrown back, and the sound echoed across the land. A few volunteers who'd stuck around erupted into cheers, rushing over to hug me, their voices a blur of, "You did it," and "She's staying." I laughed through the sobs, wiping my face with my sleeve as I ran to let Luna out. She bounded into the new enclosure, leaping and sniffing every corner, marking it as hers. Watching her prowl with that fierce grace, free but still mine, made every blister, every tear worth it. That evening we celebrated, me, Luna, and the little crew who'd become family. Someone brought a cooler of sodas, and we sat on the trailer steps, watching Luna explore her new world. She darted through the grass, splashed in the creek, then flopped down in her den, her eyes half closed in contentment. I leaned back, the license still in my hand, feeling lighter than I had in months. But it didn't end there. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a call from a local rescue group. 3 fox kits, abandoned and scared, needed a home. No one else could take them. My heart skipped, but I glanced at Luna, sprawled in the sun, and thought of the community that had rallied for us. "Yeah," I said into the phone, grinning, "I've got the space." Within days, we were building again, another enclosure, smaller but just as strong, with the same crew pitching in. Luna watched from her spot, her ears perked as the kits arrived, their tiny yips filling the air. She didn't mind the new neighbors. She'd stroll by their fence, curious but calm, like she knew she was still queen of this patch. I started sketching t-shirts with her face on them, selling them online to fund the work. People loved it, sending pictures of themselves wearing them, their donations keeping us going. Every day brought something new. Fixing a fence, feeding the kits, laughing with Jake or Lily over coffee. It was hard, messy, beautiful chaos. Late one night, I sat on the trailer steps, the sky a blanket of stars. Luna padded over, her head resting in my lap, her purr vibrating through me. I looked out at the enclosures, hers, the foxes, and realized this wasn't just about saving her anymore. It was bigger. She'd pulled me into a life I'd never imagined, one where I could help, where I mattered. Those golden eyes caught mine, steady as ever, and I smiled. "You started this, Luna," I murmured, "and I'm not stopping now." Thank you for watching. If you like the story, feel free to comment, like, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video.